make comments about seeing a book in Ottawa or Montreal archives written in Mi'kmaq, the rules of hockey. We tried to find that. We had National Archives trying to help us. They couldn't find it, but there's books out there. And a lot of the rules that they used in hockey when it went to Montreal, they would go back to the Halifax Dartmouth rules, which were likely the Mi'kmaq rules. And you'll see in the film some of these pieces, but there's just so much more research we could get done. There's a piece in, a researcher told us they seen once, research in treaties, they seen Mi'kmaq on ice in 1758 with bone skates. So we didn't find that excerpt, so it's not in the film. We could only put what we found or the people who actually saw and could link us to it. So there's lots of opportunity for more research, and the film is sort of like a reconciliation of our history. April.
Just trying to get the green light now.
Will you come in and say a couple of words? April?
Can you turn the light down for us?
Talk about Cheryl and the work we've done.
Hi everyone. Thank you, Cheryl, for coming. We're so happy that we are giving this to you. We were going to do it to you the other night, but you didn't show up, so thank you. Cheryl gave us a lot of confidence as we were going through this project. Sometimes you don't know what you're doing, and it's like, I don't know, and so thank you for that. It's like, okay, keep going, keep doing what you're doing. So this is a project that we've been working for quite a while.
Use the mic, there's no one in the back here, be sure that people are speaking over there.
Well, we're ready to.
But the film's, well, we're done talking. It's the film they're gonna need.
We're ready for the film. All right.
How long is that gonna be?
You got it on the mic.
Okay. We're just gonna let you see the film, and hopefully you'll have about 7 to 12 minutes for questions.
Did it?
And I'm gonna ask them if they need it to be that loud.
It's the one in the back of British
It seems everybody was claiming this game as their own. You see in countries, Denmark, they all say they had this, game going, but they all had these teeny tiny sticks. They all had these little field hockey sticks, little curly sticks, little tiny little sticks. Mi'kmaq had a game where the stick almost looks exactly like the graphite ones we have today.
So one time, Glooskap was hunting, fishing, and he come home. And the wigwam was empty. He lived with his grandmother, his big Jew, and with his brother, Martin. And when he got home, they were gone. So he started to look and panicking. And he realized this is not something that has ever happened before. And he noticed way off in the distance, he saw a canoe going really fast. And he recognized his grandmother and his brother. And he recognized Ruby. And he knew what was happening. So Glooskap couldn't catch up to him. He jumped in his canoe and he went to the other side. He went to an area and he just was not fastened. So he called upon his friend, Abu, the whale. He summoned him. The whale came and told the whale what was happening. The whale said, "Get on my back, I will take you. I know where he lives." When he saw Wimpy, he said, "I want my family back." And Wimpy said, "Wait a minute. In order to get them back, you have to play 3 games. And if you win, you can have your family back. If I win, I want all the amethysts from Partridge Island and among your people." The 3rd game is very important. He brought out a stick with a curve at the end. And he had rawhide, shaped round. So, he took this game and he said, "If you could score on me, you could have your family back. But if I score on you, I'm going to win." So they went back and forth. So they took the stick and hit the rawhide back at each other, back at each other. They had like little nets behind each other. Finally, Glooskap said, "Had enough." Hit the rawhide just so hard, so fast, it turned into fire and went right into his, and he scored. And Glooskap said, "There, I win. I want my grandmother back, and I want my brother back." And he said, "Yes, the deal is the deal." He gave them back. And then Glooskap said, wait, I'm taking this game back to the Mi'kmaq people too as well. So he took that stick, which is known now, today, as a hockey stick.
What you've got with hardwood trees is a little different than softwood trees. Softwood tree will come down and it'll fan out in every direction. It'll create a ball at the end of it, but with the hardwood trees, what you've got is you've got a main stem that goes down farther and then it roots off of that. That's what this is. What we were using for hockey sticks, definitely legendary piece of the game, the Mi'kmaq stick, and made from a single piece of wood, usually hardwood that you find is ash is one of the nicest ones. The thing about ash is ash likes water, and you'll see it growing near the waters. And if you find any slopes on the side of a bank or an embankment, the roots seem to bend down. It gives you like a natural crook in the blade. So it's definitely that hockey stick, the Mi'kmaq stick that was used before NHL days. They had sort of the semi-professional hockey league, and they were all using Mi'kmaq sticks. And that's sort of how the game popularized, I guess, is with the use of our Mi'kmaq sticks. And even again in the early days, the use of the Mi'kmaq puck. It was a puck fashioned out of wood, not rubber, but they said that it was cut from a spruce tree because the resin in the spruce makes it the hardest. And it was cut about a ½ inch above and a ½ inch below a branch wall, because again, the branches coming out from the heartwood would make it a solid piece of wood. They said it was an inch thick and 3 inches wide. And today, the NHL official puck is 3 inches wide and 1 inch thick.
We started this documentary after a discussion we had in regards to a research paper that Vernon Glode of Millbrook did. Vernon did a research paper about the Mi'kmaq hockey stick. This inspired us to take a deeper look into the role of the Mi'kmaq in hockey.
I was finding a lot of research on when the British soldiers and the Mi'kmaq were playing the game on the ice, and the Mi'kmaqs were winning all the time because they had these long sticks that looked like hockey sticks. And the British soldiers, they had whatever they could bring over from the old country, which was hurling sticks or field hockey sticks, very short little 3-foot sticks. And the Mi'kmaqs at this time already had 5-foot sticks that, like I say, looked like hockey sticks. I can imagine the poke checking and forechecking that was going up and down the ice was pretty easy. It was pretty easy to tell that the British weren't long to start trading them. Trading them for things for these hockey sticks. And it was I believe his name was Cretchen. He got posted in Halifax, and he was really involved with these soldiers. It was a good place for them to get that exercise and stuff. And when they moved to when he got stationed in Kingston in Montreal, he introduced the game there. And I can remember back when Don Cherry got a fella to research the birth of hockey. They came up with Kingston, Ontario as the birth, which, by the way, is where Don Cherry's from. But I think they kind of shot themselves in the foot when they showed that this picturing guy was, whenever there was shipments coming down, he always made sure that there was a shipment of hockey, Mi'kmaq hockey sticks, brought to them from these boats, from Halifax.
So in 1917, the NHL started and was also sending back to Nova Scotia for the Mi'kmaq hockey sticks. And then back in 1875, the first official hockey game was played in Montreal, and they were sending back to Dartmouth Costco for the Indian hockey sticks. And then in 1828, Tufts family genealogy states that Windsor, Nova Scotia was sending back to Dartmouth for Nova Scotian hockey sticks. One of the interesting things that I found in my research was a 100-year-old hockey stick that my great-great-grandfather Alexander Cope made. The stick was made in 1917, the same year the NHL was formed. Another interesting thing that I found in my research was that for over a period of 200 years, people from all over were sending to Tufts Cove and Nova Scotia for the Mi'kmaq hockey sticks.
What's interesting about the Tufts Cove area, the first written history of this game being played on ice was in 1749. So we look at the Windsor, the test from the International Hockey Society, the first time it was written. It takes us to 1749 in Tufts Cove, Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. And then later on, further confirmed in oral history of Joe Cope in the early 1900s. One of the interesting things is the Dartmouth Tufts Cove area, that in 1749 there were 9 or 10 players each on each team. And then if you look down into the first game in 1875 in Montreal, there was 9 players on the official games as the NHL is evolving. So the early NHL and the early game of professional hockey very much resembles the Mi'kmaq game on ice in 1749, more so than it does today with the 5 players.
There's a saying by an old Mi'kmaq elder who's no longer with us. His name is Old Joe Cope. Long before the Pale Faces strayed to this country, the Mi'kmaq or Micmacs were playing 2 games, a field game and an ice game. Now, historically written, there's documentation stating, especially in 1749, and even possibly as early as the late 1300s, going into the 1400s, of documentation being written about a game being played on ice, seeing these primitive people playing the game on ice using roots of trees and even a wooden puck. When we played the game, it's very much different than what the game was actually played as today. The teams would have been very much different, even as far as, 10 players on ice to maybe even 50. It just depends who was all there and who all wanted to play. This here is a 120-year-old hockey stick that originated here in this community, and the carver's name is Alex Cope. What they would do, they would carve these sticks out, ship them out on trains, and send them to a company named Star Skates. Now, before the NHL was even formed, there's people all over North America using these specific sticks because they were created to perfection. And when you think about perfection and people who created sticks, they went straight to the originators of the game, who are the Mi'kmaq people. Now, the people of the Sabega district, ranging from Millbrook First Nation all the way down to Jaboto, Halifax, they were mainly the carvers for hockey sticks.
So the earliest written history is important in claiming the game. And Windsor, Nova Scotia and the International Hockey Society say that you have to have the earliest written history to claim the game, and then other elements. But the first test is it has to be in writing. And for the Mi'kmaq people and most Indigenous societies, there wasn't a written system of record keeping in English or French or Latin. But what we do have for the Mi'kmaq claim is references in military diaries, references in early explorers, and references to the Mi'kmaq people, references to a game on ice. And one of the earlier references we have is 1749 in Tufts Cove, Nova Scotia, which is Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. And there was reference to the Mi'kmaq playing a game on ice with hockey sticks, with pucks, with skates made of bones. So we look at not just oral history, the language, but also the lake system and the continuity of evidence that we have had. If we look towards Tufts Cove, and you can see on the maps that Halifax, Dartmouth, and Nova Scotia is a lot of lakes, an intricate system of lakes in Nova Scotia, and particularly in this Halifax, Dartmouth, Bedford, Sackville area. So we have 1749 reference in a military diary in writing, and then we fast forward to 1943 when you have an elder, Joe Cope, sending into the Halifax Herald editorial that, based on his oral history from his father, who would have been born around early 1800s, was claiming that the Mi'kmaq are the inventors of hockey and that it wasn't Windsor, it wasn't Kingston, but that the Mi'kmaq have always had a game of hockey. So Joe Cope's claim and his oral history is part of the lake system that we're looking at in Nova Scotia in this area.
Most societies rely on the written text of history. And one looks at the word history, for example. If you do that perspective alone, it's his story. But when it's our story, or my story, that's the perspective that has to include oral testimony. Let me give you an example of how courts have dealt with it in the past. Courts were very reluctant to allow elders as witnesses to give only oral testimony in our language. So many times court decisions have been made without our understanding being taken into consideration. So you have only half of a story. Now the courts have recently decided, for example, the Supreme Court of Canada has decided that oral testimony has to be given equal legal weight as the written testimony. So now they can no longer deny our story in terms of oral testimony. It has to be given equal legal weight. But until today, that has not really taken hold across the country, I would say. So people still rely on only half of the story, which is the written text. In the treaty story, for example, which is told in our songs and in our ceremonies and in our old testimony, you have to now put both of them together. You have to have what's written in a document, a treaty document, and what's told by our stories and our legends and our elders' testimony to get the full picture of what a treaty agreement was. So if you take that situation and put it into a historical context of anything, for example, the history of sports development, or the history of political development, or economic development in our communities, always has an oral testimonial aspect to it.
We're looking at Windsor's claim and what you guys went through the process of making a claim to hockey, and you went through the International Hockey Society. Can you tell me a little bit about that process and some of the markers they're looking for?
So from my understanding, the man, Garth Vaughan, who is accredited for doing much of the research towards Windsor being the birthplace of hockey, he brought forward to the International Society, the exact name is Society for International Hockey Research, the research that he had come up with to have it approved by them. And they came back with him with a list of requirements in order for the game to be considered hockey. And what this sheet of paper says was, when was the earliest documented game of hockey played in Windsor? Was hockey played elsewhere before that game? Was there a direct connection from hockey played in Windsor to hockey played elsewhere and to present day hockey? And from my understanding, that was them telling him, you have to submit us with this information in order for us to even consider your research to be credible.
The challenge, I guess, for Mi'kmaq people is finding that written history when we have a oral history tradition. What's the earliest that you guys have found documentation?
We have written reference made by Thomas Chandler Halliburton, who was a judge, lawyer, politician, and an author, of an early childhood memory of the boys playing hurley on the ice behind King's School. Now, that's not the exact wording, which I can get for you later, but what that tells us is this book was written in 1800. So we know that prior to 1800, when he was a child, the game of hurling was being played on ice for him to recount it as an adult in his book. It's often thought that Fort Edward had a commanding officer whose last name was Hockey, and it's been presented in a way to say that Windsor being the capital at the time, any soldiers that were stationed here would probably go on to Halifax. They believe that he may have witnessed the boys playing hurley on the ice behind King's School, saw this as a good game for his soldiers to interact with each other, get exercise, showed them how to play this game, and they may have gone on to other military installments, such as possibly Dartmouth or Halifax, and showed them the game that Hockey showed them, or Hockey's game, which later got shortened to Hockey. Now, again, we don't know if there's any credible source to this, but it's commonly believed. We also do know that if you do go to the Annapolis Valley, you can actually still find people with the last name Hockey. So we do know that it is a last name.
The first Mi'kmaq written evidence was 1749. Before that, we're dealing with oral history and a pre-contact language. We're just wondering if you know of anything between, around that time that can go.
I don't know anything from around that time. I can tell you that I have heard references made to the Mi'kmaq being involved in the evolution of hockey. To what extent, I've never really known. I have heard reference to the name being somehow linked to the Mi'kmaq as well, but I've always been told that there was nothing found as of yet to back that up as being for sure. But I have definitely heard it being possibilities.
Yeah. Can you tell me about the sticks?
Today, they usually steam them, or they're two pieces, and that makes them weak in this spot right here. But what they actually did was they would pull the tree up by the root. So this part here that you're seeing here would be the root of the tree, and this would be the natural curve. This would have been the trunk or the body of the tree. And that's how they made them so strong. Now this is characteristic of a Mi'kmaq made stick, and everything we know leads us to believe that this is original. Now if you took a stick that was made today, and 100 years down the road, do you think it would be in this good shape? They had the skill and the craftsmanship to make these sticks. Now the downfall in these sticks was the fact that there was a middleman. The Mi'kmaq would craft the stick. They would sell them off to Starscape Manufacturing Company, which would rebrand the sticks and sell them off for a profit. Now, my understanding is what happened was Starscape thought, well, why are we buying the sticks and selling them? We're losing that initial investment. Why don't we just make them ourselves? That's where the steam stick and the two-piece stick came in, because they didn't have the skill or the knowledge to make this.
A lot of the rules prior to 1749 are in the Mi'kmaq language. And Silas Rand in his dictionary found lots of words that refer to this game. And one of the reasons why we feel that this game was here pre-contact is because Silas Rand spoke many languages, and he could tell which languages were pre-contact languages, which languages Mi'kmaq words had French or English influence. So the words that he described in this game were pre-contact, pure Mi'kmaq in its purest form, described in the game on ice, sort of like forts and passing back and forth. We have vowels, so we have a bunch of pre-contact language to support that.
To skate. The mokomi is sliding away. And mosquito flying like a slap shot.
Okay, this is Elder Mike Marshall from Eskazoni. He remembers hockey when he was 4 or 5 years old, when his mom made him skates out of leather and wood.
Yeah.
Kuya mo din man
Pistin Minalais.
Lucia.
Lucia.
Yeah.
Perdi juga habis
Allora,
And another guy's coming, he wants to
he wants a pair too.
press too. Couple of guys,
Oh.
They made him, and they were playing up there on the front of my doorstep.
Now one time in one night, yard
Yeah, I ate one.
on hockey, yeah.
Hockey, yeah. And after that, my mother got mad at me. She tell the boys
Yeah, all these friends came and they wanted skates too. So she had to make them skates also. Yeah. And they were made out of kamuja, maple wood. She made the blades out of it.
Yeah. We didn't know about hockey that time. But we play hockey. I don't know anything about it, but we play.
Yeah.
Alchema, for example, is what they use, our people use for what we now know as a hockey stick. Then you have the infinitive form of the verb, alchemamk, and alchemamk means to play, or in this particular case, let's say to play hockey. Hockey being an unknown word at the time. And then we have the word babim. Babim is just simply to play. It doesn't matter whether it's what the game is, but you say, they would say, oh, babinchik, they're playing, you know, this kind of thing. So the word is quite clear in the Mi'kmaq language. It existed for a long, long time. My first experience with it was probably, I'd say maybe the mid-60s. I heard it for the first time, didn't know what it meant. And then when I began my training in linguistics, and I had to travel to Big Cove a few times, of course, I began to hear it more and more. But also even before 1969, there used to be it was called the Maritime Indian Hockey Championships. And it was hockey being played by Big Cove, Eskasoni, Member 2, and probably Restigouche, and Prince Edward Island. They used to have their championship games at the North Sydney Forum in just outside of Sydney, in North Sydney. And at that time, I began to hear the word from the people from Big Cove, the hockey players from Big Cove. They used to say, Alchemadi, we're going to play hockey, or Alchemahanan, that's my hockey stick, you know, and so on. So I heard it a lot then, and I understood it by then, but it still sounded a little foreign to me. I wasn't absolutely sure. But of course, by the 70s, I began to realize, yeah, this is our word for hockey. Alchemamk is the infinitive form of the verb, to play hockey. Alchemahan is the noun for the hockey stick, and Alchema is I'm playing hockey. So yeah, we do have that word. So and it's not a new word; it's existed a long, long time. So this word, the word hockey, as we now know it, H-O-C-K-E-Y, our people, of course, will drop the H, the initial H, and say hockey, much like the French would. That's what they use generally now. They would say hockey, but they will add a Mi'kmaq suffix on the end of that word. So that word alchemai or alchemamk is slowly disappearing. We have to do, it's a job. We have to do something to resurrect it. That's all.
When you talk about a publication that we found written by the Zeno brothers, which were direct descendants of Henry Sinclair, who was supposed to be here 50 years before Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and it's been refuted for years that he's actually been on this journey. And we have this writing from his journals of those trips that were documented in this book by his descendants, the Zeno brothers. And in there, they talk about specific things that they've seen. And one of the cases was they had seen this area that had been on fire, and it literally burned for a month at a time. And Henry Sinclair sent an expedition of men over this little hill in order to sort of examine what was burning and why it was burning, even through the rain. And they sent back, in the document, they said that these men came back, they said they traveled through rivers of pitch, like all the ashes and soot that were burning in these fields were running off. And sure enough, talking to the geologists today, they're saying that there are places in North America, in especially eastern North America, there's only 2 places. So one of them is Stellarton, Nova Scotia, and the other one is a place called Tony River. Now, talking to my boss, Tim Bernard, he was doing a project on the place names database with St. Mary's University. And one of the places that they found was a place called Buktuagan. And Buktuagan is the place where you go to get fire. Now, Tim had asked me, is that where we're getting our fire starting material, like quartzite or pyrite or something that we use to make fire? And when I was doing some research on that, I came across Ken Adams at the Fundy Geological Museum. So I was talking to Ken and sort of interacting with him. He was saying, well, closest sources are to that about 150 kilometers. He said, yeah, you're not going to find that material there. He said, but what you will find is there's coal fields on the surface or very shallow in the Earth's crust. And when Nova Scotia was moving and being created, it used to crunch grind, it would spark and ignite these coal fields, and they would literally burn for months at a time. So he was referring to a point in Nova Scotia's history that we lived in, like, before European contact. And again, when you talk about Henry Sinclair, the only way he would have been able to write about those things were if he actually saw them himself. The only way he would have saw them is if he was here. So we believe that Henry Sinclair was here before Christopher Columbus. And even that journey may have been a visit, sort of a revisit. He might have been here even earlier than that. And there's just a lot of research, I guess, that has been done. Now, even some of the earliest recordings by these ethnographers who were writing about the Aboriginal people in Nova Scotia, one of the earliest documentations was of this game that the Mi'kmaq were playing on the ice.
So the spiritual element, the physical element, the mental element, and very importantly, the cultural element of our games have all been seen as a holistic wellness, a holistic way of being well. So whether it's ice hockey that we played, or running, as I say, that we've done to hunt, swimming to fish, or paddling on a canoe, all of those are physical exertion, but there is a spiritual element to each of them. And usually it's about Thanksgiving.
And what I'd like to do now is to kind of read it, the oldest excerpt that we had been able to locate, and it's a piece written in 1836, in a book in 1836, in reference to a 1685 recording of this game, this Mi'kmaq game played. So, it is played on a frozen pond or river with 2 sides of 10 men each. The players use deer gut to tie runners of sharp bone or wood to their moccasins to better slide along the ice. The goals, made of upright sticks or small heaps of stones, are set a few hundred paces apart. Each player has a curved stick with which he tries to hit a wooden ball, the object being to send it into the opposing side's goal. It is permissible to hit an opponent anywhere except the head. The likelihood of this peculiar activity enjoying wide acceptance or popularity is exceedingly slim. End of quote. We got a few minutes. I know some of you guys might be a little hot or want to go to while the ones in the back.
I just want to say great job. Yeah, yeah.
One of the reasons we went right back to 1398 and Henry Sinclair is, of all the written pieces we're finding, it was consistent, whether it was 1800s, 1700s, 60, 1398. They all mention the Mi'kmaq playing a game on ice. The other thing, we don't try to say there's a birthplace, but there's certainly a continuity of the Mi'kmaq playing a game on ice in Mi'kmaq territory. So we're not going to go, it's Windsor, Kingston, or Stellarton, but it's definitely a Mi'kmaq story. Thank you.
Just couldn't hear you. You use the microphone.
Oh,
All we hear is go Joy.
okay.
Almost got us dancing.
That's it anyways. Any questions or comments or anything like that? Yeah? There's no mic. People are cutting out.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No, it's all right. You know what I'm going to say anyway.
What are you gonna say?
I just don't believe that. You do it